For problems 11 through 16 on worksheet 18, remember if the part of the measure is given with a radian measure, then that's the way that your answer should be given as well. So I'm going to do 3 extra examples with the radians because that seems to be the one that is the most difficult for you guys. So the first thing I want you to remember is we talked about how counterclockwise is the natural progression around a coordinate plane because that's the way we name the quadrants. And if you go the reverse, which would be clockwise, that's how we get negative degree measurements. So be careful with your sign on your final answer. Make sure you go back and check which direction you were going so you will know whether to make your answer positive or negative. In this one, we're going counterclockwise, so we'll know we'll have a positive answer. So the first thing I notice is that I go through the first quadrant, second quadrant, and third quadrant completely in this revolution. And so that's, we know, 270 degrees. And we talked about how today, since the complete revolution is 2 pi and half is pi, then 3/4 of the way would be 3 pi over 2. So we know that we have gone 3 pi over 2 radians as soon as we get to this point, because that's 3/4 of the way around the figure. And so to figure out what this section is right here, we have to know that this 90-degree section of the coordinate plane would be pi over 2 radians. And we know that this section right here is pi over 4, so I can find the remaining part right here by subtracting the whole minus the part. So taking pi over 2 and subtracting pi over 4 from it, whole minus part. Now we can do that in our calculator as fractions. Just remember not to put the pi in your calculator. You're just going to do the 1/2 minus the 1/4. And when you get a decimal, just hit math enter to get that as a fraction. So we can see that that is 1/4 pi, or pi over 4. So this is also pi over 4. Both of these are pi over 4. So now to get this full revolution, I want the 3 pi over 2 for the 270 degrees, plus the pi over 4 section that we just found right here. So you have 3 pi over 2 plus pi over 4. Again, you're just entering the fraction parts without the pi. So this would be 3/2 plus 1/4. So we will do 3/2 plus 1/4 and change that to a fraction when we get a decimal, and we get 7/4. So that is 7/4 pi, or 7 pi over 4 radians. Okay, so let's look at another one. In this revolution, the first thing I notice is I'm going counterclockwise. So again, this will be a positive answer. I start here and I go all the way around completely one time to right here. So remember, all the way around at 360 degrees is 2 pi radians. In addition to going that full revolution, I go this amount of rotation as well. So I need to find what is this section right here in radians. Well, I'm given this little sliver to be pi over 18, and I know 1/4 of the way, the 90-degree section, is pi over 2 radians. So again, I'm going to take the whole pi over 2, and subtract the part I don't want, which is pi over 18. So I can do the fraction as 1/2 minus 1/18 and get that decimal as a fraction, and we get 4/9. So I know that this section right here is 4 pi over 9, or 4/9 pi. So that's what I'm adding to the 2 pi for the complete revolution. So we have 2 pi plus the 4 pi over 9. So in my calculator, I'm just going to do 2 plus 4/9 and change that to a fraction, and I get 22/9. So my answer would be 22 pi over 9, or 22/9 pi radians. Either one of those is fine. All right, let's look at one more. First thing I notice here is I'm going clockwise, which means my final answer, we don't want to forget, will be negative. So I'm starting here, and I see I go around one full time to this point right here. So there's a 2 pi for that full revolution. Then I go from here to here is a half of a rotation. That's another 180 degrees, but in radians, that's a pi radians. So I have the 2 pi plus another pi, and then I have a little bit more that I need to go. So I need to find this section right here. I'm given this unwanted section is the pi over 6, and that is this fourth of the quadrant here, which is the 90 degrees, or pi over 2. And I'm going to subtract out the part I don't want, the pi over 6, and that'll give me this section right here. So pi over 2 minus pi over 6, I'll just put in my calculator as 1/2 minus 1/6, and hit math enter to get it as a fraction, which is 1/3. So this is pi over 3, 1/3 pi. So I want to add that to my ongoing calculation here. So I have the 2 pi plus another pi plus the pi over 3. So now in my calculator, I'm just putting the numbers in front of pi. So that'll be 2 plus 1 plus 1/3 in the calculator. 2 plus 1 plus 1/3. And when I get a decimal, math enter gets me a fraction of 10/3. So 10/3, or 10 pi over 3 radians. But don't forget, the direction was clockwise. So that'll be a negative 10 pi over 3 radians. If you don't have a calculator that does fractions, you should be able to do these by hand. They're not that difficult. If you're doing pi over 2 minus pi over 6, you have to have a common denominator. So the least common multiple of 2 and 6 is 6. So you want to change the pi over 2 so that it has a denominator of 6. 2 times what is 6? 3. So you have to multiply the numerator by 3. So it'd be 3 pi. 3/6 and 1/2 are equivalent. So now I can subtract pi over 6 from 3 pi over 6. Remember, this is an understood 1 pi. So we have both of these cut in sixths, so we would have a denominator of 6, and 3 minus 1 is 2. So we would get 2 pi over 6, which can be reduced because 2 over 6 both have a common factor of 2 that you can factor out. 2 goes into 2 one time, and into 6 3 times, so that would simplify to pi over 3. That's what we found in the calculator for pi over 2 minus pi over 6 as well. So you can do that by hand if you don't have a calculator with that math enter feature.